Emily Bennett, a 35-year-old successful businesswoman in New York, seemed to have it all. With her thriving marketing firm, she was admired for her sharp mind and strategic skills. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, there was a lingering emptiness she couldn't shake. Her days were consumed by meetings and ambitious plans, but her nights were often marked by silence and a gnawing sense of isolation. One Friday evening, as usual, Emily found herself leaving the office late. Rain poured steadily, and the streets were nearly empty. Stopping at a red light, she noticed something unusual. A young boy, around 12 years old, huddled under a shop awning. His clothes were soaked, his face smudged with dirt, and his eyes, wide and desperate, searched the passing cars for help. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she watched him, unsure whether to drive away or stop. Every rational part of her screamed to ignore the situation and move on. Her life was meticulously planned, devoid of risks or unnecessary complications. But something in those frightened eyes struck a chord. Against her better judgment, Emily pulled over, stepped out of the car, and approached him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern but guarded. The boy looked up at her, hesitant and trembling. I need help, ma'am. I'm really cold, and I don't have anywhere to go." Emily's usual composed demeanor wavered. "Where are your parents?" she asked, though she already sensed the answer. "I don't have any," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. There was a vulnerability in his response that melted through her typical defenses. Emily, who always prided herself on making decisions with logic and caution, now faced an unexpected emotional crossroad. Taking this boy in went against every instinct she had, but leaving him out here alone felt unforgivable. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Tyler," he replied, his voice strained. The streets remained eerily quiet as the rain kept pouring. Emily took a deep breath, knowing this decision would ripple far beyond tonight. Bringing him home wasn't just a small act of kindness. It was a choice that could unravel everything she'd carefully built, especially with her mother, Rose Bennett, who prioritized status above all else and would see this as a dangerous threat to their family's image. "Okay, Tyler, get in the car. Let's get you somewhere safe." She opened the passenger door and motioned for him to climb in. The tension hung thick in the air. Emily was fully aware of the consequences her choice could bring. As she drove through the wet streets, she glanced at Tyler in the rearview mirror. He clutched an old, worn backpack tightly, his small frame still shivering. There was fear in his eyes, but also a glimmer of hope, perhaps the first he'd felt in a long time. Emily's thoughts raced. What was she doing? She didn't know this boy, where he came from, or the kind of trouble he could bring. But something deep inside told her that this moment mattered more than her comfort or her mother's approval. By the time they reached her high-end apartment building, Emily knew this was only the beginning. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness would unravel secrets, ignite conflicts, and test every aspect of her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The car ride home was silent, but Emily's mind was anything but calm. As she drove through the quiet, rain-soaked streets of New York, doubts began to creep in. What was she thinking bringing a stranger, a street kid, no less, into her home? The rational part of her brain screamed that she was making a mistake, that this would only lead to trouble. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to turn back. Tyler sat quietly in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the city lights passing by, as if he couldn't believe where he was. His silence spoke volumes, and Emily could sense the fear and uncertainty radiating from him. She glanced at him in the rearview mirror, and their eyes met for a brief moment. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of hope and trepidation, that made Emily's chest tighten. When they finally arrived at her apartment building, Emily parked the car and took a deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back now. She stepped out of the car, opened the door for Tyler, and motioned for him to follow her inside. As they rode the elevator up to her apartment, Emily's thoughts drifted to her mother, Rose Bennett. Rose had always been a towering figure in Emily's life, a woman whose approval was hard to earn and even harder to keep. She valued status, appearances, and the company they kept. Rose would never approve of this, of Tyler. Emily could already hear her mother's voice, dripping with disapproval, lecturing her about how this would tarnish the family's reputation. The elevator dinged, snapping Emily out of her thoughts. They had arrived at her floor. She led Tyler down the hallway to her apartment, her heart pounding in her chest as she unlocked the door. As they stepped inside, the warmth of the apartment was a stark contrast to the cold, rainy night outside. Tyler stood in the entryway, looking around with wide eyes. The apartment was spacious, modern, and impeccably decorated, far removed from anything he was used to. He hesitated, unsure of what to do or where to go. "You can leave your shoes there," Emily said gently, pointing to a mat by the door. "And, make yourself at home." Tyler awkwardly slipped off his wet shoes and stood there, clearly out of his element. Emily couldn't blame him. She wasn't exactly sure what to do next either. This wasn't something she had planned for. "Are you hungry?" she asked, trying to break the awkward silence. Tyler nodded, his expression still guarded. Emily led him to the kitchen, where she quickly put together a simple meal, sandwiches, and soup. She placed the food in front of him, watching as he hesitated for a moment before starting to eat, slowly at first, and then with more urgency as hunger took over. As Tyler ate, Emily's mind raced with questions. Who was this boy? What had happened to him? And what was she going to do now? She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her, and the reality of what she had done began to sink in. She had brought a complete stranger into her home, with no plan and no idea of what to expect next. "Tyler," Emily began, her voice softer than she intended. "Do you have anywhere else to go? Anyone you can stay with?" Tyler shook his head, not meeting her eyes. "No, it's just me." Emily's heart sank. She had expected that answer, but hearing it still hit hard. This boy was alone in the world, with no one to turn to. And now, whether she was ready or not, he was her responsibility. Just then, her phone buzzed. Emily glanced at it and saw her mother's name on the screen. Rose was calling, no doubt wanting to know why Emily hadn't called her after work as she usually did. Panic surged through Emily. She couldn't answer, not with Tyler sitting right there, and not with the guilt gnawing at her. She let the call go to voicemail, knowing she would have to deal with her mother later. For now, she had to focus on Tyler. He finished his meal and looked up at her, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty in his eyes. Emily took a deep breath, realizing that the real challenge was just beginning. She had made a choice, and now she had to face the consequences, whatever they might be. "Come on," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll show you where you can sleep." Emily led Tyler to the guest room, a neatly furnished space that was rarely used. It was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and a comfortable bed. Tyler stood in the doorway, staring at the room as if it were a mirage. "This is for me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded. "Yes, you can stay here for as long as you need." Tyler stepped into the room, his small frame looking even smaller as he took in his surroundings. He turned to Emily, a look of disbelief on his face, and for a moment, she thought he might cry. But he held it together, simply nodding and murmuring, "Thank you." Emily watched him for a moment longer before quietly closing the door. As she walked back to the living room, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. She had taken a leap into the unknown, and there was no telling where she would land. With a heavy sigh, Emily sat down on the couch, her mind still spinning. The storm outside continued to rage, the rain pounding against the windows, but inside, the apartment was calm. She knew, though, that this calm was only temporary. The real storm was yet to come. The next morning, Emily woke up early, her mind still reeling from the night before. As she walked down the hallway, she paused outside the guest room where Tyler was sleeping. The door was slightly ajar, and she peeked in to see him curled up under the blankets, sleeping soundly. For a brief moment, a sense of calm washed over her, but it didn't last long. She knew what was coming. As Emily headed to the kitchen to make coffee, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Her mother, Rose Bennett, was calling again. Emily hesitated, but she couldn't avoid her mother forever. With a deep breath, she answered the call. "Good morning, Mother," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good morning, Emily," Rose replied, her tone as sharp as ever. I've been trying to reach you. Is everything all right? Yes, everything's fine. Emily lied, but she could feel the tension building. Are you sure? You didn't call me last night. You always call me after work, Rose said, her voice tinged with suspicion. Emily knew she had to tell her mother about Tyler sooner or later, but she wasn't ready for that conversation just yet. I was just really tired and went to bed early, she said, hoping to deflect the conversation. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Emily, you know I don't like it when you keep things from me. Is there something you're not telling me? Rose's voice was laced with accusation. Emily's heart raced. She knew her mother well enough to know that Rose wouldn't let this go easily. But before she could respond, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Tyler standing in the doorway of the kitchen, looking uncertain and a little frightened. Mother, I have to go, Emily said quickly. I'll call you later. Without waiting for a response, she ended the call and set her phone down on the counter. Tyler shifted nervously, his eyes darting around the room. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to scare you. Emily shook her head, offering a reassuring smile. You didn't scare me, Tyler. How did you sleep? Okay, I guess, he replied, though his voice was still tinged with uncertainty. Good. Are you hungry? I was just about to make breakfast, Emily offered, hoping to ease his anxiety. Tyler nodded, and Emily set about making a simple breakfast: eggs, toast, and juice. As they sat down to eat, she could see that Tyler was still on edge, his eyes constantly flicking toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Emily knew she needed to talk to him, to understand more about his situation, but she didn't want to push him too hard. Instead, she tried to create a sense of normalcy, chatting about simple things, the weather, the view from the apartment, anything to help him relax. But the peace was short-lived. Just as they were finishing breakfast, there was a loud knock on the door. Emily's heart sank. She knew exactly who it was. I'll get it, she said, trying to sound calm, but her hands were trembling as she walked to the door. She opened it to find Rose standing there, impeccably dressed as always, her expression a mixture of concern and disapproval. Emily, she said curtly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. Emily closed the door and turned to face her mother, trying to keep her composure. Mother, this isn't a good time. Rose's eyes narrowed as she noticed Tyler standing in the kitchen, his small frame partially hidden behind the table. Who is that? She demanded, her voice cold and sharp. Emily took a deep breath, knowing there was no more hiding it. Mother, this is Tyler. He's staying with me for a while. Rose's eyes widened in disbelief, and her face twisted with anger. What on earth are you talking about, Emily? You brought a street child into your home? Are you out of your mind? Mother, please, Emily began, trying to keep her voice steady, but Rose wasn't listening. This is completely unacceptable. Do you have any idea what people will think if they find out? How this will reflect on our family? On you? Rose's voice was rising, her anger palpable. Emily could feel the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest, but she forced herself to stand her ground. Tyler needed help. I couldn't just leave him out there. Rose's expression hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. This is exactly the kind of impulsive, reckless behavior I've warned you about, Emily. You cannot just pick up strays off the street and bring them into your life. It's irresponsible and it's dangerous. Tyler is not a stray. Emily shot back, her own anger flaring. He's a child, a person who needed help. I'm doing what I think is right. For a moment, there was a tense silence between them. Rose looked at Emily, her eyes cold and calculating. You're making a mistake, Emily. A serious one. I hope you realize that before it's too late. With that, Rose turned on her heel and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the apartment, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Emily stood there, staring at the closed door, her heart pounding. She knew this was far from over. Rose wasn't the kind of person to let something like this go, and Emily could already feel the weight of her disapproval pressing down on her. Behind her, Tyler was still standing by the table, looking small and scared. Emily turned to him, her anger and frustration melting away as she saw the fear in his eyes. It's okay, Tyler, she said softly, walking over to him. You're safe here, I promise. Tyler looked up at her, his eyes wide and uncertain. Are you sure? Your mom? She was really mad. Emily knelt down beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Don't worry about my mom. I'm here, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Tyler nodded slowly, but Emily could see the doubt lingering in his expression. She couldn't blame him. She was filled with doubts herself. But as she looked into Tyler's eyes, she knew she had to stay strong for both their sakes. The conflict with her mother had only just begun, and Emily knew there would be more battles to come. But she also knew that she couldn't turn back now. She had made her choice, and no matter what it cost her, she was determined to see it through. The tension in the apartment lingered long after Rose's departure. Emily could feel it like a heavy cloud hanging over her, but she knew she couldn't let it take over. Tyler was still there, and he needed her to be strong. She couldn't afford to let her mother's anger undermine her decision. Over the next few days, Emily made a conscious effort to create a sense of normalcy for Tyler. She established a routine: breakfast together in the morning, some quiet time for him to read or watch TV while she worked from home, and then dinner in the evening. It wasn't much, but it was something stable, something he could rely on. At first, Tyler was reserved, keeping to himself and rarely speaking unless spoken to. Emily understood his reluctance. After all, he had been through a lot, and trust wasn't something that came easily for him. But she could see glimpses of the boy beneath the fear. The way his eyes lit up when she made pancakes for breakfast, or how he seemed to relax, if only a little, when they sat together watching a movie. One afternoon, Emily decided to take Tyler out to Central Park. It was a sunny day, and she hoped that getting out of the apartment might lift his spirits. As they walked through the park, she noticed Tyler glancing around, taking in the sights and sounds with a mix of curiosity and caution. He stayed close to her side, his small hand gripping hers tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. Have you ever been to Central Park before? Emily asked, trying to spark a conversation. Tyler shook his head. No, I've never really been anywhere like this. Emily smiled gently. Well, there's a first time for everything. What do you think? Tyler looked around, his eyes lingering on a group of kids playing soccer in the distance. It's nice, he said softly. Peaceful. They continued walking until they found a quiet spot by the lake. Emily sat down on a bench, and after a moment, Tyler joined her. For a while, they just sat there, watching the ducks glide across the water, neither of them saying much. After a while, Tyler broke the silence. Why did you help me? He asked, his voice quiet but filled with genuine curiosity. You didn't have to. Emily looked at him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. She hadn't expected the question, but she knew she owed him an answer. Because you needed help, she said simply, and I couldn't just walk away. Tyler looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. People usually do. Emily felt a pang of sadness at his words. Well, I'm not like most people, she said, trying to reassure him. I'm not going anywhere, Tyler. He glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. You promise? There was something so earnest in the way he asked that it almost broke her heart. I promise, she said firmly, meeting his gaze. You can trust me. For the first time since he had arrived, Tyler's tense posture seemed to ease, just a little. He nodded, as if accepting her words, though Emily knew it would take time for him to fully believe them. Trust was something that had to be earned, and she was determined to do whatever it took to gain his. As they walked back home, Emily noticed a small change in Tyler. He walked a little closer to her, his grip on her hand a bit more relaxed, and there was a hint of a smile on his face. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Back at the apartment, Emily continued to make small gestures to show Tyler that he was safe and welcome. She bought him some new clothes and let him choose his own, wanting him to feel a sense of ownership and normalcy. She also found a few books she thought he might like, leaving them in his room for him to discover on his own. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, Tyler spoke up. Thank you, Emily, he said, his voice shy but sincere. Emily looked at him, surprised. For what? For everything, he replied, his eyes downcast. For letting me stay here. For taking care of me. Emily smiled, touched by his words. You don't have to thank me, Tyler. I'm glad you're here. Tyler nodded, but Emily could see that he was still processing everything. She didn't push him to talk more, knowing that he needed to come to terms with things in his own time. But she was encouraged by the small steps he was taking, the little ways he was beginning to open up. Later that night, as Emily was getting ready for bed, she heard a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Tyler standing there, looking nervous. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. Tyler hesitated, then nodded. "I just wanted to say good night." Emily's heart swelled at the simple gesture. "Good night, Tyler. Sleep well." Tyler gave her a small smile, the first real smile she had seen from him, and then turned to go back to his room. As Emily watched him leave, she felt a sense of hope. The walls Tyler had built around himself were beginning to crack, and for the first time, she felt like they were truly connecting. The next morning, they fell into their routine once again, but this time, there was a noticeable difference. Tyler was more engaged, asking questions about the work Emily was doing, and even offering to help with small tasks around the apartment. He still had moments of withdrawal where he would retreat into himself, but those moments were becoming less frequent. Emily could see that Tyler was starting to trust her, and it filled her with a deep sense of responsibility. She was determined not to let him down, no matter how difficult things might get. But even as their bond grew stronger, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Her mother's disapproval loomed like a dark cloud, and she knew that Rose wouldn't give up on trying to get rid of Tyler. The conflict between them was far from resolved, and Emily could sense that something was brewing just beneath the surface. For now, though, she chose to focus on the small victories, the moments of connection, the quiet smiles, the slow but steady progress. Tyler was beginning to feel like a part of her life, and Emily was starting to realize just how much that meant to her. As the days passed, Emily and Tyler settled into a comfortable rhythm. Their connection deepened with each shared meal, quiet conversation, and evenings spent watching movies on the couch. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of purpose that went beyond her work. She found herself looking forward to seeing Tyler's small, hesitant smiles and hearing his shy voice ask questions about the world around him. But the calm was soon interrupted by the very thing Emily had been dreading: her mother, Rose Bennett. Rose had never been one to let things go easily, and her disapproval of Emily's decision to take in Tyler was no exception. It wasn't long before she started making unannounced visits to Emily's apartment, her presence always marked by an air of judgment and barely concealed disdain. One Saturday afternoon, as Emily and Tyler were playing a board game in the living room, the doorbell rang. Emily's heart sank, already knowing who it would be. She exchanged a quick glance with Tyler, who immediately tensed up, his eyes flickering with anxiety. "I'll get it," Emily said, trying to keep her voice calm. She stood up and walked to the door, bracing herself for the confrontation she knew was coming. Sure enough, when she opened the door, Rose was standing there, impeccably dressed as always, her expression a mixture of irritation and determination. "Mother," Emily greeted her with a forced smile. "I wasn't expecting you. That much is clear," Rose replied coolly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes immediately swept the room, landing on Tyler, who was trying to make himself small on the couch. Emily could feel the tension rising as Rose's gaze hardened. "Emily, we need to talk," Rose said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Tyler, why don't you go to your room for a bit?" Emily suggested gently, turning to the boy. Tyler nodded quickly and slipped away, his footsteps barely audible as he retreated to the safety of his room. Once Tyler was out of sight, Rose turned her full attention to Emily. "This has gone on long enough, Emily," she said sharply. "You need to end this nonsense and send that boy away. He doesn't belong here." Emily felt a surge of anger at her mother's words. "Tyler belongs here as long as he needs to," she replied, her voice firm. "I'm not sending him away, Mother." Rose's eyes narrowed. "You're being foolish, Emily. You have no idea who this boy is or what kind of trouble he might bring. You're jeopardizing everything you've worked for, everything I've worked for." "This isn't about business or reputation," Emily shot back. "This is about doing the right thing. Tyler needs help, and I'm not going to turn my back on him just because it's inconvenient." Rose's expression hardened even further. "You're making a huge mistake, and you'll regret it. Mark my words." With that, Rose turned on her heel and stormed out of the apartment, leaving Emily standing in the middle of the living room, her heart pounding with frustration and anger. She knew her mother well enough to know that this wasn't the end of it. Rose wasn't one to give up easily, and Emily could sense that her mother was already plotting her next move. Sure enough, over the next few days, Rose's attempts to sabotage Emily's decision became more blatant. It started with phone calls, each one filled with thinly veiled threats and guilt trips. Rose would remind Emily of all the sacrifices she had made for her, of the family's reputation, and of the potential consequences if anyone found out about Tyler. When the phone calls didn't work, Rose escalated to more direct actions. She contacted a lawyer under the pretense of concern for Emily's well-being, trying to convince her daughter that taking in Tyler was legally risky. Emily saw through the ruse immediately, understanding that her mother was trying to scare her into compliance. One day, Rose even showed up at Emily's office, catching her off guard. Rose walked in, unannounced, and began loudly questioning Emily's judgment in front of her colleagues. The tension in the room was palpable as Emily did her best to remain composed, but she could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her, their curiosity and concern adding to the pressure. "Mother, this is not the time or place for this conversation," Emily said through gritted teeth, trying to maintain her professional demeanor. Rose ignored her, continuing her tirade. "You're risking everything, Emily. Do you really think you can play house with some street kid and not face any consequences?" Emily's frustration boiled over. "That's enough, Mother. I'm done having this conversation with you." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Rose stared at her daughter, clearly taken aback by her defiance. Without another word, Rose turned and left the office, leaving Emily to deal with the aftermath. After that incident, Emily knew she had to take a stand. She had allowed her mother to interfere in her life for far too long, and it was time to draw the line. That evening, after a quiet dinner with Tyler, she decided to confront the issue head-on. "Tyler," she began, sitting down with him on the couch, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, you're safe here. My mother, she doesn't understand, but I do, and I'm not going to let her or anyone else take you away from me." Tyler looked up at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "Do you really mean that?" "I do," Emily replied, her voice strong and steady. "I promised you, Tyler, and I keep my promises." For the first time since Rose had begun her campaign against him, Tyler's shoulders relaxed, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Emily knew that her mother's efforts had shaken him, but she was determined not to let Rose win. As the days went by, Emily remained vigilant, fully aware that her mother wouldn't give up easily. But she also knew that she was ready to fight for Tyler, no matter what it took. The bond they were forming was something she hadn't anticipated, but now that it was there, she couldn't imagine her life without it. Still, there was an uneasy feeling that lingered in the back of her mind, a sense that something was coming, something that could threaten everything she had built with Tyler. But whatever it was, Emily knew she wouldn't face it alone. Tyler was starting to believe in her, and in turn, Emily was discovering a new kind of strength within herself. Together, they were forging something that her mother couldn't understand, something that went beyond blood or status. And for the first time, Emily felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed were marked by an uneasy calm. Emily and Tyler continued to settle into their routine, but the shadow of Rose's interference still loomed over them. Despite Emily's best efforts to reassure Tyler, she could sense that he was still on edge, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. One afternoon, as they were returning from a trip to the grocery store, Emily noticed a man standing across the street from her apartment building. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, and seemed to be watching them. There was something unsettling about the way he stood there, still and silent, his eyes fixed on them as they approached. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She tightened her grip on Tyler's hand and quickened her pace, keeping her eyes forward. "Come on, Tyler," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's get inside." Tyler glanced up at her, sensing her unease, but didn't ask any questions. They hurried into the building, and once inside, Emily couldn't resist the urge to look back. The man was still there, his gaze following them until the door closed behind them. The encounter left Emily unsettled, but she tried to brush it off. New York was full of strange people, she told herself. Maybe it was just a coincidence, someone who happened to be standing there at the wrong time. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. Over the next few days, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She saw the man again, standing near the park where she and Tyler often walked, and once more outside her office building. He never approached them, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Finally, Emily decided to take action. She went to the front desk of her apartment building and asked the doorman if he had noticed the man hanging around. "Yeah, I've seen him a couple of times," the doorman said, frowning. "He doesn't come inside, just stands across the street. Gives me the creeps, to be honest." "Did he say anything to you?" Emily asked, her anxiety growing. "No, ma'am. Just stands there. But if he's bothering you, I can call the cops next time I see him." Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure what good it would do. She couldn't help but wonder who the man was and why he seemed so interested in her and Tyler. That evening, after putting Tyler to bed, Emily sat in the living room, her thoughts racing. She didn't want to alarm Tyler, but she couldn't ignore the situation either. Something wasn't right, and she needed to get to the bottom of it. The next day, as Emily was leaving her office, she spotted the man again. This time, he was standing closer, on the same side of the street, as if he was waiting for her. Emily hesitated for a moment, then decided to confront him. She couldn't keep living in fear, and she needed to know who he was and what he wanted. She walked toward him, her heart pounding. The man noticed her approach and straightened up, his expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice firm despite the nervousness she felt. The man looked at her for a long moment before finally speaking. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of something darker. "I'm just here to deliver a message." "A message?" Emily repeated, her anxiety spiking. "From who?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached in his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to her without another word, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before Emily could say anything else. Emily stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the envelope in her hand. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Finally, she opened it, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short, typed message. "You're playing a dangerous game. Keep the boy close, but don't forget, others are watching." The words sent a cold wave of fear through Emily. Who were others? And why were they interested in Tyler? The warning was vague, but it was clear that someone was keeping tabs on her and the boy she had taken in. Emily quickly stuffed the note back into the envelope and looked around, but the man was long gone. She hurried home, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. When she got back to the apartment, Tyler was in his room, reading one of the books she had given him. Emily took a moment to collect herself before going in to check on him. "Hey, Tyler," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "How are you doing?" Tyler looked up from his book and gave her a small smile. "I'm okay. Just reading." Emily nodded, forcing a smile in return. "That's good. Let me know if you need anything, okay?" Tyler nodded and went back to his book. Emily watched him for a moment, her heart heavy with the knowledge that there were forces at play that she didn't understand, forces that could put Tyler in danger. As she stepped out of his room and closed the door, Emily knew she needed to be more vigilant than ever. Someone was watching them, and she had no idea who it was or what they wanted. The situation was growing more complicated by the day, and Emily was beginning to realize that protecting Tyler might be more difficult and more dangerous than she had anticipated. She spent the rest of the evening on high alert, double-checking the locks on the doors and windows, and peering out through the curtains every so often to make sure the mysterious man wasn't lurking nearby. But the night passed without incident, and by the time she went to bed, exhaustion was beginning to overtake her. Yet sleep didn't bring her any peace. She tossed and turned, her mind filled with images of the man's cold eyes and the ominous message he had delivered. What did it all mean? And how could she keep Tyler safe in a world that seemed determined to tear him away from her? The next morning, Emily woke up with a sense of resolve. Whatever was going on, she wasn't going to let fear control her. She had to get to the bottom of this and find a way to protect Tyler, no matter what it took. As she prepared breakfast, Emily considered her options. She could go to the police, but what would she tell them? That a strange man had given her a vague warning? They might not take it seriously, and worse, they might involve child services, which could complicate things further. No, Emily decided. She needed more information before she could take any drastic steps. But she also knew that she couldn't do this alone. As much as she hated to admit it, she needed help. And there was only one person she could think of who might be able to provide it. Later that day, after dropping Tyler off at a friend's house for a playdate, Emily made a call she had been dreading. She needed to speak with her mother. Emily stood outside the cafe, her nerves on edge as she waited for her mother to arrive. The decision to involve Rose hadn't come easily, but after the strange encounter with the man and the cryptic message he delivered, Emily knew she was out of her depth. Rose might be controlling and overbearing, but she was also resourceful, well-connected, and, most importantly, fiercely protective of her family's interests. If anyone could help unravel the mystery, it was her. When Rose arrived, she was her usual composed self, impeccably dressed and exuding an air of authority. She greeted Emily with a brief hug, though there was an undercurrent of tension in her movements. "Emily," Rose said as they sat down at a secluded table, "I have to admit, I was surprised when you called. I thought you were determined to handle everything on your own." Emily sighed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "Mother, I need your help. Something's going on, and I don't know who else to turn to." Rose arched an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but also suspicious. "What exactly is happening?" Emily hesitated, then recounted the events of the past few days. The man who had been watching her and Tyler, the strange note, and the growing sense that they were being followed. As she spoke, she watched her mother's expression carefully, searching for any sign of what she might be thinking. When Emily finished, Rose was silent for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. "This is troubling," she finally said. "But what makes you think it has anything to do with Tyler?" "I don't know for sure," Emily admitted. "But the note mentioned keeping the boy close and warned that others are watching. It feels like it's connected to him somehow." Rose nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing. "And you don't know anything about his past? Where he came from?" "No," Emily replied, her frustration evident. "Tyler hasn't said much about his life before I found him, and I haven't pushed him to talk about it. But now, I think there's more to his story than I realized." Rose sat back, her expression pensive. "Emily, you've taken on a lot more than you bargained for with this boy. If he has connections to people who are dangerous—" "I know, Mother," Emily interrupted, feeling the familiar sting of guilt. "But I can't abandon him now. I need to know what's going on, and I need to protect him." Rose studied her daughter for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, I'll make a few calls, see if I can find out anything. But Emily, you have to be prepared for whatever we uncover. It might not be what you want to hear." Emily nodded, her heart heavy with the implications of her mother's words. "I understand. Just please help me figure this out." Rose reached across the table and took Emily's hand, her grip surprisingly gentle. "I'll do what I can, but you need to be careful. This situation is more dangerous than you realize." Over the next few days, Rose began her investigation, using her extensive network of contacts to dig into Tyler's background. Emily tried to keep things as normal as possible at home, but the tension was palpable. Every time the phone rang, her heart would skip a beat, wondering if it was her mother with news, good or bad. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, Emily's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it and saw it was from Rose. "Come to the house. We need to talk. Now!" Emily's stomach tightened. She knew this was it. Her mother had found something. But what? And how bad was it going to be? "Tyler, I need to go out for a bit," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I won't be long, but I need you to stay here, okay?" Tyler looked up at her, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Is everything all right?" Emily forced a smile. "Everything's fine. I just need to talk to my mom about something. I'll be back soon." Tyler nodded, but Emily could see the worry in his expression. She hated leaving him, especially now, but she needed to know what her mother had discovered. Emily arrived at Rose's house, her nerves frayed. Rose met her in the study, a folder of documents spread out on the desk. The look on her mother's face was grave, and Emily's anxiety spiked. "Mother, what is it? What did you find out?" Emily asked, her voice tense. Rose didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed Emily the folder. "You need to see this for yourself." Emily took the folder with trembling hands and began to read. The documents detailed a series of events that left her breathless. Tyler's real name wasn't Tyler at all. It was Andrew Parker. His mother had died under suspicious circumstances, and his father, a man named Richard Parker, had been involved in criminal activities for years. After his wife's death, Richard had gone underground, taking Andrew with him. The authorities had been searching for them both, fearing the worst. Emily felt sick as she read through the reports. Tyler, Andrew, had been on the run with his father, moving from place to avoid detection. But at some point, they must have been separated, leaving the boy alone on the streets. "Emily," Rose said gently, pulling her back to the present, "Richard Parker is dangerous. The people who are after Tyler, they're not just anyone. They're looking for him because he's a key to finding his father. They believe Tyler knows something important, something that could bring down Parker's entire operation." Emily's mind was reeling. "But Tyler doesn't know anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's just a child. I don't think that matters to them," Rose replied, her tone serious. "They'll do whatever it takes to find his father, even if that means using the boy." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Everything made sense now. The man watching them, the cryptic message. Tyler wasn't just a lost child. He was a target, a pawn in a much larger and more dangerous game. "What do I do, Mother?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with fear. "How do I protect him?" Rose's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, Emily saw genuine concern in her mother's eyes. "You need to keep him close, just as the note said. But you also need to be prepared for whatever comes next. We can't do this alone, Emily. We need to involve the authorities, the right people who can protect Tyler and bring his father to justice." Emily nodded, though the thought of bringing more people into the situation terrified her. But she knew Rose was right. They were in over their heads, and Tyler's safety had to come first. "I'll contact the right people," Rose continued, already thinking ahead. "But you need to get Tyler ready. Once we make the call, things will move quickly. We need to be prepared." Emily left her mother's house that night with a heavy heart. The truth had come out, but it had only made things more complicated. Tyler wasn't just a boy in need of help. He was the center of a storm that could engulf them all. When Emily returned home, she found Tyler waiting anxiously in the living room. He looked up as she walked in, his eyes wide with worry. "Emily, what's going on?" Emily knelt down in front of him, her heart breaking as she realized how much he had already been through. "Tyler, there's something I need to tell you. Something important." Tyler's eyes filled with fear, and Emily took a deep breath, preparing herself for the difficult conversation ahead. She had promised to protect him, and now more than ever, she intended to keep that promise, no matter what it cost her. Emily sat on the floor in front of Tyler, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to reveal. Tyler looked at her with wide, fearful eyes, sensing that whatever she was going to say would change everything. "Tyler," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "there's something you need to know about your past, about who you really are." Tyler's face paled, and Emily could see the fear taking hold of him. She reached out and took his hands in hers, trying to offer some comfort. "Your real name isn't Tyler. It's Andrew. Andrew Parker." Tyler's eyes widened in shock, and he pulled his hands back, shaking his head. "No, that's not my name. That's not me." Emily felt a pang of sorrow as she watched him struggle with the truth. "I know this is hard to hear, but it's important. Your father, Richard Parker, he's been involved in some very dangerous things. And now there are people looking for him, people who think you might know where he is." Tyler's breath quickened, his fear turning into panic. "But I don't know where he is. I don't know anything." "I believe you, Tyler. I mean Andrew," Emily corrected herself, feeling the awkwardness of using his real name. "But these people don't care. They think you're the key to finding your father, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Tears welled up in Tyler's eyes, and he buried his face in his hands. I just want to be Tyler. I don't want to be Andrew Parker. I don't want any of this. Emily's heart broke for him, and she gently pulled him into a hug, holding him close as he cried. I know, sweetheart. I know. But we have to face this together. I promise to protect you, and I'm going to keep that promise. For a long time, they sat there on the floor, Tyler crying softly as Emily held him. She could feel the weight of the impossible dilemma pressing down on her. Tyler deserved a normal life, free from the shadows of his past, but the reality of their situation made that seem impossible. Eventually, Tyler's sobs subsided, and he pulled back, wiping his eyes. What do we do now? Emily hesitated, knowing that the answer would only add to his burden. We have to go to the authorities. My mother is already making arrangements to contact the right people. People who can protect you and help bring your father to justice. Tyler looked at her with a mixture of fear and resignation. But what if they take me away? What if they put me in some foster home or something? The thought had crossed Emily's mind too, and it terrified her. But she couldn't let Tyler see that fear. I won't let that happen, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'll make sure you're safe, Tyler. We'll find a way to get through this together. Tyler nodded slowly, though Emily could see the doubt in his eyes. She couldn't blame him. After everything he had been through, trust didn't come easily. But she had to believe that they could find a way out of this, even if the path was unclear. The next day, Emily and Tyler packed a small bag with essentials, knowing that they might have to leave quickly once the authorities were involved. Emily tried to keep things light, joking with Tyler about the clothes he was bringing and what snacks they should take, but the tension in the air was palpable. As they prepared to leave, Emily's phone rang. It was Rose. Emily, her mother said, her voice brisk and efficient. Everything is set. The authorities are ready to take Tyler into protective custody. They'll be at your apartment in an hour. Emily's stomach twisted at the thought of handing Tyler over to strangers, even if it was for his protection. What happens after that? She asked, her voice tight with worry. They'll take him to a secure location where he'll be safe, Rose replied. You'll need to stay out of it for your own safety. This isn't something you can handle on your own, Emily. The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Stay out of it? How could she? Tyler was depending on her. She had promised to protect him, and now she was being told to step aside. Mother, there has to be another way, Emily pleaded. I can't just hand him over and walk away. This is the only way, Emily, Rose insisted. You have to trust that the authorities know what they're doing. You've done your part. Now, let them do theirs. Emily clenched her jaw, her mind racing. She understood her mother's logic, but it went against every instinct she had. How could she abandon Tyler when he needed her the most? But what choice did she have? If she resisted, she risked putting him in even more danger. I'll think about it, Emily said finally, knowing she had little time to make a decision. After she hung up, Emily turned to Tyler, who had been watching her anxiously. They're coming to take you to a safe place, she explained, trying to keep her voice steady. They'll protect you, but I might not be able to go with you right away. Tyler's face crumpled with fear, and he shook his head. No, Emily, I want to stay with you. Please don't make me go. Emily's heart ached as she knelt down in front of him, her hands resting on his shoulders. Tyler, I don't want to lose you either, but we have to do what's safest for you. I'll be right behind you, I promise. I won't let anything happen to you. Tyler clung to her, his fear palpable. Don't leave me, he whispered, his voice breaking. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she held him close, the impossible choice weighing heavily on her. She had to protect him, but she couldn't do it alone. The authorities were the best option, but the thought of sending Tyler away, even temporarily, was unbearable. Just as Emily was about to speak, there was a knock at the door. The sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through her, and she knew that time was up. The authorities had arrived. Emily stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. Tyler, I need you to be brave, she said, her voice trembling. This is going to be hard, but it's the only way to keep you safe. Tyler looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. I'll try, he whispered, though Emily could see the terror in his eyes. Emily walked to the door and opened it to find two serious-looking agents standing there. They introduced themselves, their voices calm and professional, but Emily barely heard them. All she could think about was Tyler, standing behind her, about to be taken away. One of the agents stepped forward, speaking gently. "We're here to take Andrew into protective custody. We understand this is difficult, but it's for his safety." Emily nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She turned back to Tyler, who was clutching his small bag, his knuckles white. "It's time to go, Tyler," she said softly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'll see you soon, I promise." Tyler's lower lip quivered, but he nodded, his eyes filled with tears. He took a hesitant step toward the agents, then looked back at Emily, his expression pleading. The agents reached out to take him, but in that moment, something inside Emily snapped. She couldn't do it. She couldn't let them take him away. "No," Emily said, her voice firm. "I'm going with him." The agents exchanged a look, surprised by her sudden declaration. "Ma'am, that's not part of the protocol." "I don't care," Emily interrupted, her voice shaking with emotion. "I promised him I'd protect him, and I'm not going to break that promise. If you're taking him, I'm coming too." For a moment, there was silence as the agents considered her words. Finally, one of them nodded. "All right, you can come with us, but you need to understand that this is a serious situation. Once we leave, there's no going back." Emily nodded, her resolve unshakable. "I understand." Tyler's face lit up with relief, and he ran to Emily, wrapping his arms around her waist. She hugged him tightly, knowing that they were stepping into an uncertain future, but also knowing that they would face it together. As they left the apartment, Emily felt a mixture of fear and determination. The road ahead was uncertain and full of danger, but she was willing to face it as long as Tyler was by her side. No matter what happened next, Emily knew she had made the right choice. She had chosen to stand by Tyler, to protect him, even when it seemed impossible. And in that moment, she realized that the bond they shared was stronger than any fear or danger they might face. The drive to the safe house was tense and quiet. Emily sat in the back seat of the black SUV, her arm around Tyler, who was pressed close to her side. The agents in the front exchanged occasional glances, their faces grim, but they said little. The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air, each of them aware of the risks that lay ahead. As they drove through the dark streets, Emily's mind raced. She had no idea where they were being taken or what would happen once they arrived. The only thing she knew for certain was that she couldn't let Tyler out of her sight. He was scared, and she was the only thing grounding him in this terrifying new reality. After what felt like hours, the SUV finally pulled into a secluded driveway, surrounded by tall trees that shrouded the house in darkness. The agent stepped out, scanning the area before opening the doors for Emily and Tyler. "Stay close," one of the agents instructed as they guided them toward the house. "We'll explain everything once we're inside." Emily tightened her grip on Tyler's hand, feeling his small fingers trembling against hers. They were led into the house, where a few more agents were stationed, all of them on high alert. The interior was sparse and functional, clearly designed for security rather than comfort. The lead agent, a stern-looking man in his 40s, gestured for Emily and Tyler to sit at the kitchen table. "We'll be staying here for the night," he explained. "In the morning, we'll be moving you to a more secure location. For now, you're safe." Emily nodded, though her heart was still pounding in her chest. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The agent hesitated before answering. "We need to determine whether Tyler knows anything that could help us locate his father. If he does, we'll use that information to bring Richard Parker to justice. But if not, we'll still need to keep him in protective custody until the threat is neutralized." Emily's stomach churned. The idea of Tyler being used as a tool to find his father made her feel sick. "And what about me?" she asked. "Am I allowed to stay with him?" The agent's expression softened slightly. "We'll do everything we can to keep you together, but it's going to depend on the circumstances. Right now, our priority is keeping both of you safe." Emily felt a surge of anxiety. She didn't want to think about what might happen if they were separated, but the possibility loomed large in her mind. She looked over at Tyler, who was staring down at the table, his face pale and drawn. "Tyler," Emily said softly, trying to catch his attention. Do you understand what they're saying? They're going to ask you some questions about your father. But you don't have to say anything you're not comfortable with, okay? Tyler nodded slowly, though Emily could see the fear in his eyes. I don't know anything, he whispered. I don't want to see him again. He's not a good person. Emily's heart ached for him. I know, Tyler, and you don't have to see him again if you don't want to. But these people are here to protect you, to make sure he can't hurt you or anyone else. The agent cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to him. We're not going to force Tyler to do anything he doesn't want to do, he assured them. Our goal is to keep him safe, and that includes respecting his wishes. But we do need to know if there's anything that could help us stop his father. Tyler looked up at Emily, his eyes filled with uncertainty. Do I have to talk about him? Emily squeezed his hand. Only if you want it, Tyler. No one can make you do anything you're not ready for. Tyler hesitated, then nodded. Okay, he said quietly. I'll try. The agent gave a nod of approval. Thank you, Tyler. That's very brave of you. After a brief discussion, the agents decided to give Tyler some time to rest before asking any questions. They showed Emily and Tyler to a small bedroom with 2 single beds, each neatly made up with plain white sheets. The room was stark, but it was a place to sleep, and that was all they needed right now. As they settled into the room, Emily could see the exhaustion in Tyler's face. He was barely holding on, and she knew he needed rest. But she also knew that sleep would be hard to come by for both of them. Do you want me to stay with you until you fall asleep? Emily asked, sitting on the edge of Tyler's bed. Tyler nodded, his eyes already drooping with fatigue. Don't leave, he murmured. I'm not going anywhere, Emily promised. She lay down next to him, wrapping her arms around his small frame, and hummed softly, trying to lull him into sleep. It took a while, but eventually, Tyler's breathing evened out, and he drifted off. Emily stayed beside him, her mind racing despite her own exhaustion. She knew that the next day would bring more challenges, more difficult decisions. But for now, she was content to simply hold Tyler close, to offer him whatever comfort she could in the midst of this nightmare. As the first light of dawn crept into the room, Emily's thoughts turned to the decision she knew she had to make. The agents would want to move quickly to start questioning Tyler as soon as possible. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to take control of the situation, to protect Tyler in a way that only she could. Finally, when she could no longer bear the uncertainty, Emily made her choice. She gently slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Tyler, and stepped into the hallway. She found the lead agent in the living room, going over some documents with his team. Agent, she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. I need to talk to you about what happens next. The agent looked up, surprised by her sudden appearance. What is it, Miss Bennett? Emily took a deep breath, gathering her resolve. I want to be there when you question Tyler. I need to make sure he's okay, that he's not pushed too hard. I need to protect him. The agent considered her words carefully. Ms. Bennett, I understand your concern, but these interviews are delicate. Having you in the room could complicate things. I don't care, Emily insisted, her voice firm. He trusts me. If I'm there, he'll feel safer. And if I'm not, I can't guarantee that he'll be able to handle it. The agent studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, you can be there, but you need to follow our lead. We'll take things at Tyler's pace, and if it gets too uncomfortable, we'll stop. Emily nodded, relief flooding through her. Thank you. The next few hours passed in a blur. The agent set up a secure room in the safe house for the interview, and Emily did her best to prepare Tyler for what was coming. She reassured him over and over that she would be right there with him, that he wouldn't have to face anything alone. When the time finally came, Emily and Tyler entered the room together, the lead agent and another officer seated across from them. Tyler looked up at Emily, his eyes wide with fear, and she squeezed his hand, offering him a reassuring smile. Remember, Tyler, Emily whispered, you're in control. You can stop at any time. Tyler nodded, though his grip on her hand tightened. The lead agent began with gentle questions, asking Tyler about his life before he came to New York, about his father, and about anything he might remember that could help them. Tyler answered in short, hesitant sentences, his voice barely above a whisper. As the interview progressed, it became clear that Tyler didn't know much. He had been kept in the dark about his father's activities, shielded from the worst of it. But there were a few moments, a few memories that caught the agent's attention. Mentions of people his father had met with, places they had stayed, things that had seemed strange at the time, but now took on a more sinister meaning. Emily watched as Tyler struggled to remember, to piece together fragments of his past. She could see how hard this was for him, how much it hurt to relive those moments. But she also saw his determination, his bravery in facing the truth. After what felt like an eternity, the agent finally closed his notebook. "That's enough for now, Tyler," he said gently. "You did a great job. We'll take what you've told us and see where it leads." Tyler let out a shaky breath, his body sagging with relief. Emily pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as the agent stepped out of the room to confer with his team. When they were alone, Tyler looked up at Emily, his eyes red and puffy from tears. "Did I help?" he asked, his voice small. Emily smiled, brushing a tear from his cheek. "You were amazing, Tyler. You helped more than you know." As they left the room, Emily knew that they had crossed a significant threshold. Tyler had faced his past, and though the future was still uncertain, they were no longer running from it. They were confronting it head-on, together. And in that moment, Emily knew she had made the right decision. No matter what came next, they would face it side by side. She had chosen to stand by Tyler, to protect him, and she would continue to do so, no matter the cost. The days that followed Tyler's interview were filled with tense anticipation. The agents worked around the clock, piecing together the information Tyler had provided, cross-referencing it with their own intelligence. Emily stayed by Tyler's side, refusing to let him out of her sight. Every time the phone rang or there was a knock at the door, her heart skipped a beat, fearing the worst. But as the investigation progressed, a strange calm began to settle over Emily. She had made her choice to stand by Tyler, to protect him no matter what, and there was a certain peace in knowing that she would see this through to the end, whatever that end might be. One evening, after dinner, the lead agent asked to speak with Emily alone. She followed him into the small living room, leaving Tyler in the kitchen with a book. "We've made significant progress," the agent said, his tone more serious than usual. "Thanks to Tyler's information, we've managed to locate several of Richard Parker's associates. It's only a matter of time before we find him." Emily felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly tempered by anxiety. "What does that mean for Tyler?" "For us?" The agent hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Once Parker is in custody, the immediate threat to Tyler will be eliminated. But there are still legal matters to consider. Custody issues, his identity, his future." Emily's stomach tightened. She had been so focused on keeping Tyler safe that she hadn't fully considered what would happen afterward. "What do you mean?" "If Tyler's father is captured, he'll likely be charged with multiple crimes, which could lead to a lengthy trial. Tyler might need to testify, and that could complicate things. Additionally, there's the question of Tyler's guardianship. You took him in, but the state might have other ideas about where he should go." Emily's heart sank. The thought of losing Tyler, after everything they had been through together, was unbearable. "I won't let them take him from me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's been through too much already. He needs stability, not more uncertainty." The agent nodded sympathetically. "I understand how you feel, Ms. Bennett, but the decision might not be yours to make. Once the authorities are involved, they'll have to consider what's in Tyler's best interest from a legal standpoint." Emily wanted to argue, to insist that she was the best thing for Tyler, but she knew that the agent was right. The system didn't always see things the way she did. Still, she wasn't ready to give up without a fight. "Is there anything I can do to keep him with me?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "There might be," the agent replied. "Once this is over, you could petition for guardianship or even adoption, but it will depend on a lot of factors: the outcome of the investigation, Tyler's wishes, and the court's decision." Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll do whatever it takes." The agent gave her a small, reassuring smile. "We'll do what we can to support you, but for now, the best thing you can do is keep being there for Tyler. He needs you more than ever." That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she had never been more certain of anything in her life. Tyler was her family now, and she would move heaven and earth to keep him safe. The next morning, the safe house was abuzz with activity. The agents had received a tip on Richard Parker's location, and they were preparing to move in. The tension was palpable as they gathered their equipment and finalized their plans. Emily and Tyler stayed in their room, trying to keep out of the way. Tyler was quiet, his usual nervous energy replaced by a somber stillness. He knew something big was happening, but Emily had tried to shield him from the details, not wanting to add to his fears. As they waited, Emily reached out and took Tyler's hand. "Whatever happens, Tyler, I want you to know that I'm here for you. I'm not going anywhere." Tyler looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Do you think they'll find it?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I do. And when they do, you'll finally be free of all this. You can start fresh." Tyler's grip tightened on her hand. "And I'll be with you, right?" Emily's heart ached at the uncertainty in his voice. "I'll do everything I can to make sure of it," she promised. "You're not alone, Tyler. Not anymore." A few hours later, the agents received confirmation. Richard Parker had been located and was in custody. The news sent a wave of relief through the safe house, but it also marked the beginning of the next phase, a phase that Emily knew would be just as challenging. The lead agent called Emily into the living room to discuss the next steps. Richard Parker is being held without bail. The charges against him are extensive, and the prosecution will likely pursue a maximum sentence. But that means the legal process could drag on for months, maybe even years. Emily listened intently, her heart heavy with the implications. "And Tyler?" "For now, Tyler will remain in protective custody," the agent explained. "But you'll need to prepare for the legal battle ahead. The state will likely conduct a thorough review of his situation, including your role as his guardian. It won't be easy, but given everything you've done for him, you have a strong case." Emily nodded, though the prospect of a prolonged legal struggle was daunting. She knew that this was just the beginning, but she was ready to face whatever came next. That evening, Emily and Tyler sat together on the porch of the safe house, watching the sun set behind the trees. The air was cool and calm, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside them. "Emily," Tyler's voice broke the silence, tentative but steady. "Yes, Tyler? I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm also kind of relieved. Does that make sense?" Emily smiled softly, pulling him close. "It makes perfect sense. You've been through so much, and it's okay to feel a lot of different things at once. But you don't have to be scared anymore. We're in this together." Tyler nodded, leaning his head against her shoulder. "I'm glad I met you, Emily. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't found me." Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, not wanting to let him see her cry. "I'm a lucky one, Tyler. You've changed my life in ways I never expected, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." As they sat there, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear, Emily knew that they were standing at the edge of a new beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, and the challenges were far from over, but they had each other, and that was enough. The next morning, Emily was woken by the sound of her phone ringing. It was Rose. "Emily," her mother said, her voice unusually soft, "I've been talking to some people, and I think we can make this work. If you want to fight for Tyler, I'll support you. We can get the best legal team and do everything in our power to keep him with you." Emily's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mother. I want this more than anything." "I know," Rose replied, "and I want you to be happy. Just promise me you'll let me help this time. We can do this together." Emily smiled through her tears. "I promise, Mother. We'll do this together." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of hope. The future was still uncertain, but she knew she had the strength to face it. With Rose's support, and with Tyler by her side, she was ready to take on whatever challenges came their way. As they prepared to leave the safe house and begin the next chapter of their lives, Emily looked at Tyler and saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes, a hope that had been absent for far too long. They were starting over, rebuilding from the ashes of their past, and Emily knew that, together, they could weather any storm. No matter what happened next, they were a family, And that, Emily realized, was the most important thing of all. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.